From the University of Chicago, this is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We are here at Ida Noyes Hall on the UChicago campus for the second of our two mayoral forums. Today we hear from two of the candidates, 6th Ward Alderman Roderick Sawyer and organizer Jamal Green. As we did yesterday with 5 other candidates, we are asking questions on issues that are top of mind for voters: crime, transportation, and education. And how do we know that those are their top issues? Well, you, the voters, weighed in. In fact, many of the questions that we'll pose today come from our People's Agenda survey. We received around 2,000 responses from the public leading up to our forums. Thank you to everyone who chimed in. Also on the show today, since we are at the beautiful and historic University of Chicago, we'll bring you a special edition of our series, What's That Building? A map of buildings in and around campus with ties to Chicago politics. As always, we'll keep you up to speed on big local news, but first, the latest from around the country and the world. Live from the University of Chicago, this is Reset. I am Sasha-Ann Simons. We're coming to you live from the University of Chicago campus for our 1-hour live mayoral candidate forum. Now, here's the deal. We split the 9 candidates into 2 forums. Yesterday, we were at the UIC campus, and we heard from 5 of the candidates, and today's day 2. Now, these forums are a partnership between WBEZ, the Chicago Sun-Times, and UChicago's Institute of Politics. We're here with a live audience, and you can also listen to us on 91.5 FM or at WBEZ.org. You can also watch us right now as we stream live on both WBEZ's and the Chicago Sun-Times YouTube pages. Now, why did we split these forums across 2 days at 2 different college campuses? Well, for a lot of this election season, you've been seeing 9 candidates on stage at once. And it can be hard for voters to get the full picture of a candidate's views on an issue. So we chose to spread the event across 2 days and give candidates a little more breathing room to share their ideas and give you the chance as well to hear them. Now, we chose the UIC and U of C campuses because we wanted to engage with an important voting bloc this election, and that's, of course, voters who are 18 to 34 years old. Now, unfortunately, 2 candidates who had originally committed to joining us today, Johnson and WIllie WIlson, they have dropped out last minute due to scheduling conflicts. We're disappointed that they couldn't make it to tell our listeners why they should be the next mayor of Chicago. But we are happy to have 2 of our scheduled candidates here with us now to make their cases as they have throughout this campaign season. Organizer Jamal Green and Alderman Rod Sawyer. Now, the rules of the forum, they're simple. Unlike a formal debate, there are no opening or closing remarks. Answers are not strictly timed. However, this being a 1-hour forum, it'll be my job to keep things moving. If a candidate does criticize the other, that person will be given a brief chance to respond. Questions we are asking today have been informed by the People's Agenda survey, and we got nearly 2,000 responses with Chicagoans telling us everything about the issues that matter to them and what questions they have for their next mayor. All right, sound good?
Sounds great.
Let's get started. All right, so we asked voters to tell us what issues mattered most in that People's Agenda survey, and crime was clearly at the top of concerns. We began yesterday's forum with a question from Levi in Edgewater, and I want to pose it to you two today. And it was, how do you plan to address crime in the short term? So meaning the first 6 months in office, and not the investment in addressing long-term issues that may take years to actually come to fruition. People want to be and feel safe next month, he said. So question to you first, I'll go to you first, Jamal Green. In your first 6 months in office, how do you tackle crime?
Well, let me first just say thank you guys for hosting this and informing voters. And I see amazing faces out here in the crowd. Very unfortunate that 2 other candidates dropped out of this forum. Hopefully they are considering dropping out the mayor race too. But, you know, we are at a point where we must have real solutions, and we need new leadership, not the same old politicians who are owned by special interest groups or trying to buy their way in office. And so when you talk about public safety in the short term, our short-term solutions are simple. We're going to delegate $100 million to a Department of Social Workers to respond to mental health calls that are 40% of the calls that come through on 911. We're also going to put $30 million into a youth intervention department. We're going to hire youth interventionists that have priority of resources for young people who drop out of school or who get arrested, and they will be able to give them free counseling, mentoring organizations, housing support, and help put them on the right path so that we can intervene whenever a trigger happens in their life. And then we're going to start to increase home ownership as well. We're going to use a single-family mortgage bond to start backing home loans in the neighborhood so that we can lure more stakeholders. And last, I'll say, you know, because we talk about short term, I'll be on the long term all day. But on short term, we're going to invest $77 million into a block club infrastructure program so that we can start to organize block clubs all throughout the city of Chicago and empower people on their blocks to beautify their blocks, grants for parties. They're going to have phone trees so that folks can be the frontline responders and really take ownership over what's going on in their communities. Those are some of the short-term things that we would do.
Thank you. Alderman Sawyer.
Thank you as well. Those are all great ideas. I'm not going to say that they're not, but in the short term, we have to show the citizens of Chicago that we care about them. And when we care about them, we want to make sure that our police are being effective. Although constitutionally compliant, we want to make sure that they're doing their job. And we start that at the top. One of the first things in the short term to do is to replace the superintendent. We replaced the superintendent by using the process that I was a part of putting in place, which is the establishment of the Community Commission. Part of the responsibility of the Community Commission is to select a superintendent. And the superintendent should be someone that has come through the ranks, that has the respect of the rank and file, that has the subject matter knowledge that would be able to guide me and advise me on scheduling issues, on deployment, on other policing strategies that will make it safer in the short term. We have to do that first and foremost. After we deal with the superintendent, we want to make sure that the Community Commission is fully in place. You will be voting on those in February 28th, and by that time, in the short term, we will have a commission in place, a new commission in place. What we want to do is make sure that commission is out doing their job, connecting with community, making sure that they're understanding the issues in all our 22 police districts, and reporting that back to the Central Council. And the Central Council then reports back to the new superintendent. We have to get those things in the short term in place first, and not to downplay the things that Brother Green was just talking about, because we need those things as well. But we need to make an establishment first in the police department, make sure that our city is safe, and to respond to the crime anxiety that a lot of us are feeling right now. We don't want to come out the house because we don't feel that we're going to be safe when we go to the store, when we go out to dinner, when we go to a theater. We want you to go to those places because at the end of the day, that's our bottom line. That's how we receive money to provide all the services that you deserve and request on behalf of the city of Chicago.
I'll give you 20 seconds to respond there.
Yeah, my rebuttal to that is, listen, we've already been trying to do those same things over and over again, trying these pro-police strategies. It has never worked, okay? Of course, I agree on replacing the superintendent on day one, but we got to do new things, which is why we need to establish new departments and start to move experts into these fields so that we can start solving some of the root cause of what's going on. Just continue to increase the police budget is not going to get us out of this.
All right,
I said nothing about increasing the police budget, and I think the things I talked about were new solutions. It's the newest solution in there, and it's the most forward-thinking process in the country right now.
All right, let's keep this moving.
Yeah.
Thank you both for some very thoughtful responses there. One of the other candidates who had committed to being here today was Commissioner Brandon Johnson, who had to drop out but did provide this statement. I am truly sorry that I'm unable to attend today's reset on the road with the host and fellow candidates for mayor. The event is in direct conflict with a meeting of the Cook County Board of Commissioners, and as commissioner of the 1st District, I have an obligation to my colleagues and the people of Cook County that I serve, end quote. We do not have a statement from Willie Wilson's campaign for his absence today. All right, so we are going to keep it going with more questions from people who participated in that People's Agenda survey. This one from Marcel in the South Loop. He says, I worked for CPD and taught at the police academy for 5 years. I know what reform looks like, and we have not seen it at the police department. What will you do to change the culture that contributes so much to the problems that currently plague the police department? And Marcel adds, I have ideas, and I'd be happy to outline them to whomever wins the election. So keep that in mind. Our question asker is available to collaborate with solutions to the winning campaign. So Alderman Sawyer, what will you do to change the culture that contributes so much to the problems that currently plague CPD?
Again, first of all, I'll go back to my first answer and just leave that at that. Work with the commission, make sure that we're doing the job. We have to make sure that when we talk about reform, that we're complying with that, the consent decree. We need to make sure that every item, and we're far too far behind right now. I think we're somewhere at 5% full compliance with the consent decree initiatives. We have to do better than that. And again, it starts with leadership. It starts with the mayor, it starts with the superintendent, making sure that we're doing things, because right now, the police feel that they're working in a toxic work environment. They're not afraid of criminals. They're afraid of their superiors. They're afraid of what may happen in the event that a police officer makes a mistake or does something, maybe not turn a camera on in time, things like that, because right now they feel that the retribution would be over the top. We want to make sure that our officers stay in compliance with the reforms that were dictated in the consent decree, making sure that we have an effective police report, because I believe that a reformed police department is actually a very effective police department. So we make sure that we double down and drive down on the reforms, make sure that we're in compliance with each and every item as it goes forward, and continue that all throughout with training and giving professional development to the officers, because they need that in order to make sure that they can continue on with de-escalation and other issues that makes it where they not have to pull out their guns as often as they need to. They want to make sure that only in extreme instances of violence where they have to pull that gun out.
Thank you, Alderman. J-Mel Green.
Well, we have to, when you talk about the police culture, a big reason why the police culture is very toxic is because we're using over-policing strategy or trying to overwork officers to solve the community's ills. And that's a reason why it blows up the way that it does, because the officers are supposed to be the social workers, they're supposed to deal with young people, they're supposed to deal with all these things in the community when they should be only focusing on violent crime, which is why some of the things that I talk about is important, of having social workers respond to mental health calls and homelessness, reopening up the mental health facilities, having temporary housing. If we start to move some of the workload off of officers, that's going to change their work conditions. We also need to tackle mental health when it comes to police officers. We have moved forward a plan to put 2 therapists per district in the city of Chicago, because their suicide rates are some of the highest, if not the highest in the country, and change their work schedule to a 4-day, 3-off work week with 1 mental health day in between, which would also move more officers to the streets. And we have to have some accountability in the police department, right? Right now, we are spending $100 million on police misconduct settlements, and we could be spending $100 million a year on something else that really matters to the community. We've moved forward a plan to have some form of insurance, and we're going to work with police on a good compromise on how we're to stop paying the insurance policies. And we can't keep hiring the Proud Boys, right? We got a police officer on the force right now who has been to the Proud Boy rallies and have been shown to engage in some public racial remarks. And we have to have a zero tolerance for that, because when we just suspend them and allow them to stay on the force, it provides a toxic workplace for other minority officers as well as for the community. So we got to have a zero tolerance and have accountability as well.
Thank you, Mr. Green. You both have said that if elected as the next mayor, you would fire Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown. So we're going to turn to a question about the police department from Marie, who lives on Chicago's northwest side. Marie says, how do you plan to increase the police force, stop the exodus of police from Chicago, and provide safety and support to them? J-Mel Green.
Well, let me just say, David Brown, I think he's going to leave before he's fired, as I'm hearing in the media, which is a good thing. But we definitely need somebody who's more in touch with the city of Chicago. When we talk about the exodus of police officers, who wants to be a police officer when you're trying to put the whole weight on their shoulders, right? And so everything that I've talked about of removing the burden, right, that's not saying that we're anti-police, because in the long run, it's going to help police officers' jobs. If they're not dealing with mental health issues and they don't turn into tragic situations that can be on video that causes that officer to be in scandals, right? If social workers are responding to it. If we have interventionists dealing with young people instead of an officer reacting wrong to a young person that ends up on video and now is a case for that police officer. This is a good thing, is that we tackle what's really going on and hire experts to deal with the issues in communities. That helps the culture, and that helps people want to be more police officers outside of some of the incentives that they should be given, whether it is free higher education, whether it is down payment and closing costs for homes. I understand the importance of incentivizing the job, but I also understand that you can't put the whole weight on police officers or people won't want to be police.
Alderman?
Yes, I would tentatively agree with what J-Mel just stated. First of all, we've been doing, the last couple of years, we've had a pilot program in the 5th Police District regarding the 4-day on, 3-day off situation, and it has been working pretty well. It's going into the 2nd year now. Now, the issue with therapists, though, because we want to make sure the police have every opportunity to be well, and behavioral wellness is always important. This is the issue now, and we're at a college right now, and I'm putting the appeal out. Right now, we've been trying to deal with both clinicians, therapists, psychologists. There is a nationwide shortage. We do not have enough to fulfill the obligation to put 1 in every police district, nonetheless 2. So, and it also has, for our 6 mental health clinics, we're having problems staffing those as well. If you're listening out there and you're in college, consider a job in therapy, in psychology. That's the way to go, because we need people in those professions. But what we want to make sure that we do with our police officers, make sure that they're securing that proper mental health to the extent that we can get those people in those districts. Also provide one thing that we're looking at right now is providing first of its kind a 20-year out for new police officers. That means they can retire after 20 years of service at the age of approximately 55. We have a tax center looking at the costing it out right now, but I got the idea based on my own personal pension. My pension in the city of Chicago is 20 years at 55. Why shouldn't our officers who, out in the street doing the frontline work get a similar pension based on what I receive?
We received a question about crime and gangs from Stanley on Chicago's South Side. Stanley wrote, "I hear gunfire outside my home just about every day. 2 months ago, a neighbor was shot by 2 gang members using AK-47s. What will you do to remove guns from gang members and reduce the shootings on the South Side?" Alderman Sawyer, what is your plan to reduce gang violence on the South Side?
I have already introduced into council the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. This is my second time introducing it. Introduced it under the last administration and now working on it again this time. What we want to do is make sure that we have a robust office that's focused on gun removal, getting guns off the street, illegal guns off the street, and also providing resources for victims of gun violence. We're also in that ordinance, we have a witness protection program in there, so we make sure that we can encourage people to give information to the police, and we will make sure that they're safe pending the outcome of the trial for those offenders. We want to make sure that gun violence is first and foremost in our administration, and this is something that I've been working on for years, and I'm going to continue to work on it as mayor. I'll have a different platform then, because as mayor, I can push things and talk to my colleagues. I have that experience and have that knowledge working with the colleagues on the city council floor. I'm a master collaborator. I've been doing this in ordinance after ordinance over my career, and it will happen with me as mayor.
Jamal Green.
Well, let me just say, I have no problem giving a good job to Rod Sawyer to be my deputy mayor, man. But let me say, when you talk about the real the issues in the communities, we got to have alternatives, right, for young people, right? We need to make sure that we're investing in them. I said yesterday that a lot of our young people are out carjacking, and they could be building the cars. A lot of our young people got guns, and they can have hammers. We got 50,000 manufacturing jobs that are open right now in the city of Chicago. 50,000. Right, that pay over $72,000 a year starting out. Why aren't we creating a pipeline to these jobs, right? So we got to bring trade into the schools. We got to bring certifications into the schools so that they can partner and go to manufacturing. We got to have tech hubs. We got tech jobs that are 6 figures coming out of high school that they can get into right now. So we need to bring tech hubs throughout the city. We got to have alternatives, and that's why the Youth Intervention Department is so important to have, so that we can intervene whenever there's a trigger, as well as make sure that there's massive programming in our school system. Schools should be open throughout the day and on weekends with massive programming for students as well as their parents. We must make sure that we're investing in every person and giving them a route to building a middle-class life. And last, I'll say, we got 380,000 lead pipes in the city of Chicago right now, poisoning young people, poisoning people all throughout these neighborhoods. We have billions of dollars in infrastructure money, and I believe the federal government even moved us some down. Why aren't we changing these pipes? This is a massive jobs program right here of all the people in these neighborhoods who can be helping us change these pipes or helping us build new homes. We can do this.
Thank you,
and
Jamal
we just
Green.
got to have the intentionality.
Quick response, Alderman?
Yes, and again, all the social programs we all support. I trust me and believe me. But when we're talking about gun violence, gunfire, I hear the same things that the caller hears every night. I live 5 minutes south of here. I experience in that. And what I will say, there have to be consequences to actions. I call it the hot stove theory. When your mother told you don't touch the stove and you touched it anyway, you get burnt. You get burnt. I support all the reentry and all the supportive services for everybody, but until we make sure that we, one, have consequences to actions, and then we can provide services for those that have done their debt to society. If we're talking about gun violence prevention, if you hold a gun illegally and you're out here shooting at people, there should be consequences to your actions. I'm not saying that we're not going to be harsh like we've heard some other candidates do, but there have to be real consequences to real actions. And once you've got past that, we will give you all the supportive services necessary. We want you to be a part of society. as long as you acknowledge that
Thank
you've
you,
done
Alderman.
wrong.
Can I quick 20 seconds on accountability? I'm sorry.
20 seconds.
I believe in accountability for sure, but the reality is that when you look at the data, just mandatory sentencing or causing any trying to have any type of sentencing guidelines, that does not change the reality, because the recidivism is very high. So folks come back to the neighborhoods and do it all over again. That's why reentry is important. That's why grabbing them before they get to committing that violent crime is important. And that's what must be our focus, not over accountability.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, this is Chicago Public Media and UChicago's Candidates Second Forum with candidates who want to be the next mayor of Chicago. We are at the University of Chicago campus with organizer Jamal Green and Alderman Rod Sawyer. We're going to take a quick pause for some news. And when we come back, we're talking transportation, so stay tuned. And we are back now with more Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. We're broadcasting live from the University of Chicago campus. This is the second of our two forums with candidates running for mayor, presented to you by WBEZ, the Chicago Sun-Times, and U of C's Institute of Politics. Here with me on stage, we have two candidates seeking the office of mayor, 6th Ward Alderman Rod Sawyer and organizer Jamal Green. All right, let's get back into it. So transportation was a huge issue in our People's Agenda survey responses, with nearly a third of responses talking about this issue. Many people were frustrated with the state of the CTA. And here is a specific question from Jen on Chicago's Near West Side. Jen says, I ride the CTA to work on a regular basis, and it has become increasingly impossible for me to predictably get to work on time in the past year. What do you plan to do in the near term and in the long term to combat the CTA's persistent problems with inconsistency, crime, and poor rider conduct? Jamal Green.
Yeah, this is such an important issue, right? The CTA should be a world-class model, and right now it's not. It's a mobile homeless shelter. And with many folks who have mental illnesses that we aren't addressing. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to remove the leadership. Let me just say that. I think we need better leadership at CTA that's more innovative. Number two is we need to declare a state of emergency to free up some funds for CTA so that we can deploy social workers to get folks off of the trains and pair them with services immediately, as well as use those funds to open up temporary housing housing, as well as a mental health clinic. That is important to tackle the root cause of what's going on so that we can start to get CTA in order. We got to have peacekeepers, a peacekeepers agency that patrol the trains to mitigate any concerns or any situations. And we need CTA to be safe, clean, fast, and at some point it needs to be free, right? Transportation is a right, and it should be, and we need to be looking towards making that a right because it'll actually help pour back into our economy. And so the immediate concerns is safety, the immediate concerns is addressing the root causes. We need to add more jobs so that we have more cleaning shifts on CTA. We need our cameras to be live so that we can actually view them in real time. There's a lot we must do, and we're ready to do it on day one.
Alderman.
Yes. Obviously, we want to make sure that the CTA is clean, safe, and reliable. We don't want it, to continue to smell like urine and weed. We make sure that we work with our CTU and our ATU union members to make sure that we understand how important it is to maintain the cleanliness of our rail stops, our buses, and our trains. This is a paramount importance. I know it may not sound big, but it is big. Obviously, we can use safety. I would eliminate the current contract we have with the dogs that we currently are on the officers. And what we can do now is, for example, we have multiple police departments and security departments at airports. We can take our officers from that airport, redeploy them, and also use that savings to put officers on CTA on the trains and buses to make that work. We also want to make sure that reliability has continued to be important. I don't know who's coordinating the plans down there. They have to be replaced. When you have a bus tracking system that we spent lots of money on, it should be reliable, and you should be able to depend on it. If you look on your phone or your tablet and it says that the bus is going to be there at 8:42, it should darn well be there at 8:42 and not be an empty one just passing you by trying to catch up with something else. That has to change. I do agree with us bringing in new leadership, bringing in transportation experts that will give us the right information. But what we do is do these things. We want to make sure that, and I have one other thing, we want to have ambassadors on the trains and buses as well to provide services for those that we, Jamal just talked about us, but the situation with the homeless and other people on the trains and buses not seeking services. We want to make sure that we can offer those services to them, and that we can do by having ambassadors patrol the trains and buses, rather, and do that work and make sure that we can give these people the services that they deserve.
What is your response to your competitor, Willie Wilson, who has said that he would boot people who are sleeping on trains? What's your response to that strategy, Alderman?
I'm sorry. You said we should boot people that don't.
Oh, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. I'm sorry. I know you didn't say it.
Willie Wilson has said that he would boot people who are sleeping on trains.
You know what? That's just insensitive. I don't even know if I should respond to that. That's just an insensitive statement to make. The people on the trains, they're not on there for convenience. It's a necessity. They have nowhere else to go. We just want to make sure we find resources for these individuals and make sure that they are getting the proper service, whether it be behavioral health, whether it be housing assistance, job, or some kind of training. We have to do better. And that's what I don't even know what else to say about
Green.
that. Right.
Well, I'm not surprised, especially because we got rabbits out there that he wants to hunt. I think that it's a human issue, what's going on CTA. This is a human issue. And everyone should be afforded basic human rights in this city. Housing is a human right. Why are there 65,000 people who are homeless in the city of Chicago that has a $28 billion enterprise? We have to be honest here. These are human rights issues, and the city of Chicago needs to step up and make sure every human in this city can grow and thrive and not have to go and live on our train system. So that's how we're going to approach in our administration, is making sure that everyone has basic human rights. Jamal
Green, you've said that you declare a state of emergency to free up money to put social workers on CTA trains and platforms. Yeah. How much do you anticipate spending?
Well, it depends. We're looking at some numbers as far as how many people are really on trains that need services, but it's definitely going to be in the tens of millions. We have to address this issue rather quickly, and then we also have to, address our shortages on CTA. And so we want to do a massive jobs program for ex-offenders and veterans, and make sure there's a pipeline to these jobs coming out of schools, right? We need to be have a good relationship with CPS for our students to know that these are good middle-class jobs on CTA. And unfortunately, all the departments are working independently, you know, so we need a pipeline to these jobs and have massive jobs programs. Right. And so, yeah.
Alderman Sawyer, you said that you would improve the CTA bus tracking system. You talked a moment ago about bringing in experts. Do you have anything more specific you can add to how you would do that?
No, I mean, we have a very robust system. They're just not using it properly. I think that we need people that understand the technological advancements that we've already made and that are inherent in the system and make sure that it works. There's always been an old statement, you know, plan your work, work your plan. I don't think they're working their plan right now. I think the infrastructure there isn't in place, but they're not using it properly. So we have to use people that in their Department of Planning, they have a scheduling department at CTA. I worked there many years ago. They have departments in there that deal with the online tracking systems. And now that it's so advanced now with technology, we can be doing it better with minimal extra input, just having the right person in place to do the job.
We received many responses to our People's Agenda survey about environmentally friendly transit solutions. Yeah. This is one from Jim in Goose Island. Jim says, there are many compelling reasons why Chicago needs to maintain and expand its public transit network, while vastly reducing the need to own and use private cars, even EVs. What will you do to get Chicago on the right path to 50% plus of all trips not made via a car and vastly reducing car ownership? Jamal Green.
Oh, this is super important as a person who have been a EV owner for many years. We have to make sure that we're addressing this issue in all of our departments, from decarbonization in our government by 2030, as well as making sure that we're moving our bus fleets to electric fleets. And I think that we can lure some of the manufacturers of these electric buses right here in the city of Chicago to create a lot of jobs. And I think that's another thing that we need to look at. We're going to institute a Department of Environment in the city of Chicago, a fully funded, fully staffed Department of Environment, and we're going to look at elements of the Green New Deal to see how we can bring it on the city level, because we need a Green New Deal right here in the city of Chicago. You won't have a greener city unless you elect Jamal Green. I'm just letting you know. You know, we have a lot of work to do in regards to auditing our infrastructure, right? That's another thing that's important, from our bike lanes and where they're placed, about how we are narrowing our streets. There's a lot we must do to audit our infrastructure to make it more walkable, make it more rideable, so that people actually want to do those things, and have better transportation systems so more people want to get on public transit, and an electric bus fleet as well.
Thank you for that response. Alderman, what will you do to get Chicago on the right path to 50% plus all trips not made via a car and vastly reducing car ownership?
We have to do more in the areas of riding and walking in particular. We just talked about electric vehicles. We all support that. We've all supported establishing a new Department of Environment, a commission-level department, to make sure that we can get the advice that's necessary. But what we're going to also have to do is do our work, the work that a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis, making sure our streets are safe, making sure that there's consequences to people that are parking and clogging up bike lanes. We may have to look at, reducing right turns on red to make people safe. These are the type of things we have to start looking at as a 21st century solutions to making sure that our walkers and our riders are safe, and including our drivers. And as we're moving to electric vehicles and other forms that reduce our carbon footprint, we have to make sure that these things are in place. And that includes making our streets safer, filling potholes, making sure that there are no vaulted sidewalks, because accessibility is for all. We want to make sure those are walking, can be, have good access to streets, people that are riding bikes, they don't fall into potholes and get hurt and injured, and also making sure that all these things are coordinated in place, and they will be in conjunction with our Department of Transportation and our Department of Environment.
All right, well, speaking of access, I want to ask you both a question that I asked the 5 candidates yesterday. This is from Jane on Twitter, and she wants to know, how will you address disparities in access to transit that negatively impact vast swaths of the far south and east sides of the city? Jamal Green?
Yeah, now I want to say I agree with everything that the Alderman just said, and we got to also, just in regards to the last question, make it more affordable, and we got to bring forth subsidies. I know the state has brought forth a $7,500 credit. The city needs to do its part to make it easier for folks to transition to electric vehicles, and that's another thing that we must do, and invest in infrastructure throughout the city of Chicago so that there are charging stations all throughout the city. So, in
So let's
regards
talk
to
disparities. Yes.
your disparities, we obviously must audit the bus routes, right? We have a lot of routes that are not being used as much as they need to, and then a lot of places that actually need routes, right? So we need to audit our routes completely so that we're making sure that all of the disparities are being met. I also agree with the extension from the 95th Red Line station to go to the edge of the city. I think that is a big deal. Oak-Hill Gardens, who is without a grocery store, who is without, proper transportation that can connect them to downtown. It's important that we audit this and do better, and we will under our administration.
Alderman.
Again, I think I talked a lot about this, about access and disparities regarding, walking, riding, and driving. And I do obviously support the extension of the Red Line, which is about 60 years, too late. But we're glad that it's coming now. But we want to make sure that when we talk about access disparities, we have to talk about all the methods of getting around the city. And I talked about them previously. When you're walking, you want to make sure that streets are safe, that we have ADA compliant crosswalks and curbs, making sure that the sidewalks are accessible, particularly those when walkers and other that have other impediments to moving clearly. We want to make sure that all of these disparities are addressed, particularly on the transportation side, because we want the CTA to be the primary focus of getting from A to B throughout the city of Chicago, and that has to happen so that we can reduce our reliance upon vehicles. And that includes having access to parking structures and other parking rides, which we do not have on the south and west sides, not nearly enough. And I would say even in Hyde Park, it's challenging to find a park space over here to catch the Metro downtown.
Thank you, Alderman. This is Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. Thank you so much for joining us here on WBEZ for the second of our two forums with the candidates running for Chicago's top office, the office of mayor. Now, two of those running, businessman Willie Wilson and Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, dropped out of this forum last minute after confirming that they would be here. That's given a bit more time to the two candidates who are here with us, organizer Jamal Green and 6th Ward Alderman Rod Sawyer. There are a lot of candidates running for mayor, and we hope that these forums are helping you to make your decision. And for everyone who is listening and the folks in the room with us here at the University of Chicago, I do want to encourage you to stick around after the candidates leave the stage at the end of this hour, because starting just after noon, we'll be doing analysis of what we've been hearing from these two. And we'll also be taking a look at where the mayor's race stands overall, less than 3 weeks away from Election Day, so stay with us. All right, candidates, I've got to move on now to education. Mark from Lincoln Park had this question. Can you explain specifically how the CPS budget can be reconfigured to put more funds in the classroom? Jamal Green.
Well, what's going on with CPS, is a travesty. As a product of CPS and watching our young people each and every day be failed, it needs to stop. And the privatizers in our schools are making millions off of the food and off of the cleanliness. But look at the results in our school buildings. And the only people that are suffering are our students. And we're supposed to be spending $30,000 per student. That money isn't making it into the classroom or into those schools. One of the things that we must do is we got to go to the state and we got to change our formula. It needs to change from enrollment-based formula to needs-based formula. Every school needs the investment that it needs, that they need, so that they can have the wraparound resources, so that they have updated books, so that they have after-school programs. It needs to be a situation where no matter where you live in this city, that there's a standard and a high-quality education, and we need to make that happen. So we're going to audit every dollar of CPS, one of the first things that we will do, as well as get rid of the waste and the privatization and bring back good-paying union jobs to take care of our kids in our classrooms and in our school buildings.
Alderman, how will you put more money in the classroom?
Well, the disparity in funding is abhorrent right now. We're spending more and we have fewer students. That doesn't make sense. But what we need to do right now is make sure that we're spending every available dollar toward the education of our students. And right now, the CPS is not doing that. We spend far too much money and far too much reliance on buildings that are decaying and making sure that these buildings are in place. But we want to make sure that when we talk about children, we should be talking about their education, their extracurriculars, their social emotional growth, especially during COVID, when they had not been interacting with people. These are the things that are important to students and to parents. Right now, even though I do support the moratorium that's in place until 2025 as it relates to school buildings, I think that we spend way too much time talking about buildings and not enough time talking about the full education of students. Where do we place our priorities? Buildings are important. I want to make sure that we use the buildings that we have, but we have buildings right now that are 5% occupied and 0% proficiency in our core subjects. That is not a sustainable model to educate our children. We want to make sure that as we're doing more towards really focusing on educating our students, dealing with the true inside of people. I talk to my principals on a regular basis in grammar school, and they're dealing with such ridiculous issues as relates to drug dealing, crime, gun violence, prostitution, and these are elementary school students. And I'm talking about this is participating, not watching. They're actively involved in this. And we're expected to keep up with the rest of the city on reading and math. It cannot happen until we really focus on truly educating our children, and that's what we have to do.
Thank you, Alderman.
Can I get a rebuttal real quick?
20 seconds.
I'm sorry, because we disagree. Me and my colleague disagree on school closures. At the end of the day, we should not be looking to close any more school buildings. We have school buildings right now in our communities that are land vacant with no purpose for them. We need to be talking about how we're going to invest in these school buildings to bring more students and more families into the neighborhood. And that's why our home ownership plan is super important. Our public bank, we want to create a public bank so that we can invest into communities, as well as all that profit that comes back and be a stream for underfunded schools. So I just want to make sure that we know we got to invest in the school buildings and not close.
Thank you for that response. Alderman?
Very quickly, the disconnect is that each one of these school buildings costs almost $1 million a year to operate vacant. That means we still have to keep it hot. We have, keep the pipes from bursting, because we are trying to reuse these buildings. We do want them to have some productive use. Don't get me wrong. I support a productive reuse of these buildings. But right now, we're spending, when you talk about our disparity in the budget, that's the biggest issue in disparity in the budget, the vacant operating schools that we have, the under-enrolled schools that we have. We need to look at a 21st century model for education, and this is not it.
But the only reason why these school buildings are vacant is because of the privatization and them selling our families this model that they can go to the charter schools and get a better education.
All right, let's keep it moving.
And they didn't. So that's the reason why they're vacant.
All right, we know violence too often takes the lives of young people. Alexander from West Lawn is asking, how do you plan on making schools safer? Jamal Green, you do not support police in schools, so in a minute, tell us what you will do to make schools safer.
Well, we're going to invest in young people, right? And I think that that's what's important. And having a police force inside our school is not the way to go. I'll be honest. I was a kid who was arrested in school because my teacher said that I yelled at him. And they put me in handcuffs and did a report and let me go on about my day. That's not how you treat young people. They need the individual attention that they're supposed to get. And we need to make sure that we are staffing schools with social workers, that we have after-school programs, mentoring organizations, not just police sitting around with guns in our school buildings. And they can also be in the area in case of an immediate response.
Alderman Sawyer, you responded to our WBEZ mayoral candidate survey that police do have a role in schools. So how would you work to improve safety at schools?
Well, as you may know, I was the author of the Cops Out of School ordinance that was presented to me by Voice, which is the voice of youth for Chicago education, childhood education. I introduced that because we needed to have the conversation, and I wanted to have that conversation whether you agree with the issue or don't agree with the issue. I thought it was far too important for us not to have it, This is the issue. We want those that made the decision. It should have been a local decision in the first place, and now that it really is, the local school councils are now making that decision on whether they want cops, school resource officers, as they're called, in their schools. Now, we also have to realize that most schools also have other security officers in school that are not CPD. There are SEIU 73 union workers that are also in the schools providing safety and security there as well. So we want to make sure that if you have a decision, some people opted in, some people opted out. That was the best solution for me, that everybody had their interests. Me personally, I was an LSC chair for 10 years. My school resource officer was the nicest guy in the world. We really didn't need him, to be honest with you, but he provided an extra set of eyes, and he was always available for assistant coaching or just dealing with the children directly. So making kids safer is not always, I agree, not always a police presence, but you want to make sure that we have adults in the space that will assist and guide our children to make sure they're making right decisions. And we have that already, and based on what I provided and introduced, we end up having local decisions made, and we end up saving a few dollars out of it as well. So I'm very proud to have been a part of that.
Thank you. Candidates, Kirsten from Andersonville has this question. Let's listen.
The Early Childhood Workforce Partnership, a group of 19 early childhood employers, estimated that by 2024, we will need 3,000 new educators and additional credentials for 1,000 existing educators whose roles now have higher degree requirements. Additionally, early childhood professionals are significantly underpaid, which does not reflect the knowledge and skill required to teach the youngest Chicagoans. So what is your plan for strengthening the early care and education workforce in Chicago?
Your plan for strengthening the early care and education workforce in Chicago. Alderman.
Well, we just had this conversation last night at a forum. One of the things you want to do is make sure that the wages are comparable. Right now, we have a competition going on right now between private child care providers and CPS, especially with the early childhood education scenario. And what CPS is doing is snatching children from the private child care providers, and that's not fair. Especially since most of the black-owned businesses, particularly women-owned black businesses in Chicago, a lot of them are child care providers. You will be devastating that industry and removing that industry out of existence. We want to make sure that they stay in place, and there's a place for CPS child care providers and people that can take advantage of that. We want to make sure that they are working together. There's another issue regarding the Type 4 license that they're required to receive. I was talking to a lot of child care advocates last night, and they feel that ISB is placing too far of a burden on them right now with that license as far as retaining and trying to attract and retain qualified individuals to serve their daycares. We want to make sure we take a good look at that. We want to make certain that what they're doing is for the benefit of the children. But again, it starts with wages. If CPS is paying people $50,000 a year and the private child care providers are only paying $15 based on the formula that they receive, we need to increase the formula.
Thank you, Alderman. Jamal Green.
Well, this is definitely an issue in regards to pay that I think we must work with our state partners to increase. Look, I got a 3-year-old right now in child care, and I don't know what I would do if I had to have him all day. All right, and so this is an important issue to make sure that our private care providers, who are our folks that support us, as well as help the families, right? We pay a lot of money to send our kids to these providers, and we need the city to step in, as well as the state, to help out in regards to how expensive it is, in regards to the wage of the private care providers, because there's no better care, for these young people than the people in these communities, and we got to make sure that we're supporting them. And we also got to help them when it comes to development and spaces and ownership, right? We have a lot of buildings and school buildings. Some of them need more space. We should be able to help give them the spaces and the city-owned properties, as well as help them in regards to ownership, right? In regards to mortgages and down payment and closing cost assistance, which we will provide under our public bank. So there's a lot we must do. This is a huge issue because the care of children 0 and up is going to determine their future, and we got to make sure that we're investing in each and every one of our young people.
All right, time for our lightning round. We've got a ton of questions from voters on all kinds of issues. So we're just going to go down the list, and candidates, your job at this portion of the event is just to answer yes, no, or maybe.
Wow.
To these questions.
That's
Again,
hard.
Yes, no, or maybe.
Or response.
Or maybe. All right, Mark from Lincoln Park, do you support giving parents vouchers that could be used in private schools?
No.
No.
All right. And that was Alderman Sawyer first and Jamal Green second for our listeners.
sure they
Just
could
told me to
tell.
say yes or no. So
I just want to make sure our listeners know whose yeses and whose nos those are. All right. And Mark from Lincoln Park had a follow-up question. Do you support an expansion of charter schools? Alderman?
no.
No.
Okay, Jamal Green says no. All right, Adriana in the Northwest Side says, will you support an elected City Colleges of Chicago Board of Trustees instead of continuing to appoint them? Jamal Green?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, everyone says yes. All right. Alex on the Northwest Side says, do you support a pilot program at a fixed cost to test universal sidewalk, snow, and ice clearance? Jamal Green?
We'll need to test it. It needs to be done.
Right. Yeah. I
So
agree.
it needs to be done. We need to fully fund it. Yes.
Alderman?
Yes. I have something to say, but I won't. Yes.
Thank you for obeying the rules there. Tammy from the Tri-Taylor area asks, do you support repealing the state ban on rent control? Alderman?
I'm sorry.
Do you support repealing the state ban on rent control?
Not at this time. No. No.
Jamal?
That's a maybe for me.
All right, Melinda in Avondale, will you continue the current guaranteed income pilot program? And for our listeners and viewers, that's the city program that's giving $500 a month to 5,000 income qualifying Chicago residents for a 12-month period right now. Jamal Green?
We already presented one that's even bigger.
Yes, no, or maybe?
$1,000 a month for 10,000 families.
Is that a yes, no, or maybe?
Yes.
Okay, and Alderman?
Maybe.
Okay, we're going to diverge from the People's Agenda survey. Yesterday, a voter asked if the candidates believe in ghosts. Today, we have our own question from Team Reset. Do you believe in aliens or intelligent life in the universe? Alderman?
I always felt that
Yes,
I would
no,
be,
or maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know this was one of the yes or no questions. I'm sorry. I thought this was a special. Strange enough, yes.
Jamal Green?
There are some aliens in the mayor race, for sure, yes.
I mean, and while I have you here, where do you fall on that ghost question? We got to know. Do you believe in ghosts, Alderman?
Well,
Yes,
yes.
no, or maybe?
Yes, I believe in spirit. Yes, I do.
And Jamal Green?
Yes, and I have to be with Cam Buckner on this, ghost buses.
We'll leave it there. Thank you to everyone who filled out our People's Agenda survey, which informed the questions that we asked the candidates in our mayoral forums yesterday and today. And our thanks to all the candidates who took part. We've been talking with Alderman Rod Sawyer and neighborhood organizer Jamal Green. Thank you to the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics for hosting us and collaborating with us on the project. And stay with us. After a short news break, we are going to tap in with a panel of experts to analyze what we just heard from the candidates and to keep that conversation going about crime, education, transportation, and much more. There's much more Reset to come, but first, why don't we go ahead and check back in with Lisa Labez. Hey, Lisa. Simons. Coming up on the show, we are live on the University of Chicago campus, where we just wrapped up the second of 2 mayoral forums that we hosted this week. Now that we've heard from 7 of the 9 candidates over the past couple of days, it's time to put their statements and ideas in context with a panel of experts. And later this hour, since we're in Hyde Park, our What's That Building series continues with a walking tour of politicians' homes in this neighborhood, past and present. Those stories and much more after the news. This is Reset, live from the campus of the University of Chicago. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're coming to you live from UChicago as part of our two-part forum with candidates in the running to become Chicago's next mayor. Now, this is a partnership between WBEZ, the Chicago Sun-Times, and U of C's Institute of Politics. You can follow along at WBEZ on 91.5 FM, WBEZ.org, or you can watch us on the WBEZ or Chicago Sun-Times YouTube pages. Now, last hour, we spent time with two of the mayoral candidates, activist Jamal Green and Alderman Rod Sawyer, talking about several issues on the minds of voters, from crime to education to transportation. Yesterday, we talked with Alderwoman Sophia King, State Rep Cam Buckner, former CPS CEO Paul Vallis, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and Congressman Chuy Garcia. Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson and businessman WIllie WIlson chose not to join us at the last minute after committing to do so. So with us now to break down those conversations is WBEZ City Government reporter Mariah Woelfel. Thank you for joining us again, Mariah.
Thanks for having me.
Chip Mitchell's here too, criminal justice reporter for WBEZ. Hey, Chip.
Glad to be here.
And Chris Berry, a professor at the Harris School of Public Policy and the academic director of the Center for Municipal Finance. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for coming to campus.
So we have got to talk about Jamal Green and Roderick Sawyer's energy and chemistry today. It was really interesting because you saw these two candidates interacting, cracking jokes. At one point, Jamal even touched the alderman's shoulder. What did you think of that, Chip?
Well, yeah, actually, the two they get along quite well. Alderman Sawyer even called his opponent up here, Brother Green, and they have some differences on policies, but they're not at each other's throats. And let's be honest, they're on the tail end of this race, at least judging by the poll that we took and that we commissioned and that we released WBEZ, the Sun-Times, NBC5, and Telemundo yesterday. They're on the rear end, so their sights are set on the front runners who were not here today.
What about you, Mariah? A little refreshing to see that. You think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I wonder if it would have looked different with, either WIllie WIlson or Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson on stage. But yeah, I would agree with Chip that their sights are set on kind of chipping away at some of the front runners, Paul Vallis, Lori Lightfoot, neither of whom they, addressed directly by name, but who you could hear them kind of criticize. And I do agree, there were some differences you saw. They have some differences about what to do with closed schools once a moratorium lifts under the next mayor's tenure, how to deal with crime on the CTA, and the importance of boosting police officers. So I do think that they have some differences, but yeah, I mean, you heard Jamal Green say that Roderick Sawyer has a job in his administration as deputy mayor, and those jokes, you see those jokes too among other candidates on the campaign trail.
What did you think, Chris? Is that something that you've seen before between these two?
Yeah, sure. And I think partly this format is a great example of getting more details out from people. And I think the premise here was that if we had fewer candidates, we could hear more from each of them. We heard more from each of them. And in this particular case with these two, what we heard is a lot of agreement on most of the issues. The disagreements were relatively small. In the lightning round, I think it was more or less a race for them to each give the same answer more quickly, but seldom a different answer. So maybe their only difference answer was whether they believed in aliens. I'm not sure. But on substantive things, we didn't hear a lot of disagreement.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Two candidates dropped out at the last minute, unfortunately. That's Commissioner Brandon Johnson and businessman WIllie WIlson. Was that a surprise to you, Mariah?
Always a surprise when people don't show up to speak to potential voters. WIllie WIlson and Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson are both, in a place where they need to attract more votes to potentially make a runoff. Our poll shows that they're in 4th and 5th place, respectively, with Wilson at 12% of the vote and Brandon Johnson at 11% of the vote if people were to cast their votes tomorrow. A lot of voters are still undecided, so there's more people to convince. And 12 and 11% isn't in a 9-person race, an impossible feat, chance of making a runoff election. And so, I think Brandon Johnson said he had a Cook County Commission, Board of Commissioners meeting to go to, and Willie Wilson was at a press conference announcing some endorsements from some Latino faith leaders. It doesn't surprise me that he would prioritize that, given this is a race where he really has to broaden his appeal beyond a base on the South and West Side that he, tends to get in previous elections that he's run in. And so trying to pull in some Latino voices, some Latino voters to his campaign, I could see how that would definitely be a priority for him, especially when Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia is really kind of dominating that space right now.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I don't think it's a huge surprise given the state of the race right now, and I think as Chip indicated, the poll that you all did really suggests that the candidates have settled into about 3 tiers at this point. We have the top tier, which has Lightfoot, Garcia, and Vallis, more or less in a statistical dead heat with one another, polling something around 20%. A second tier of candidates, which are the two that dropped out today, Brandon Johnson and WIllie WIlson, and then more or less at that point, everybody else. And I think maybe for Wilson and Johnson, they don't see a lot to be gained unless they can be on the stage with one of the top 3 to try to move up from the middle tier to the top. So maybe they thought, debating these others at the bottom wasn't a good use of their time, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the issues, folks. We spent a good amount of time talking about candidates' plans to address crime and public safety in Chicago. So, Chip, any surprises in their responses?
I didn't hear a lot of surprises. I will say that it's remarkable that Jamal Green, he's polling about 2% now, and so of that third tier, he leads the bottom 4 candidates. What's interesting about him is that his public safety plan consists not exclusively, but largely of economic development and social services, not policing. He talks about youth intervention and Department of Social Work for mental health cuts, but for mental health calls. But then he's also, as he did today, he brings up home ownership and a lot of other economic development programs. So things that that we hear a lot about, the root causes of crime, things like neighborhood disparities in wealth between the poorest neighborhoods, which is where we have a lot of the gun violence. Well, Jamal Green, I think of all these 9 candidates, has really focused on actually taking on the root causes. That's one thing. I'd say Sawyer, the other interesting thing is what he brought up is police reform. He brought up several things. How is he going to take on crime short term? What he talked about was police reform. It was getting rid of the police superintendent, for one thing, so that you can restore confidence in the police. It's making sure that the new community commission for public safety and accountability works, getting these district councils up and running, full compliance with the consent decree. And he pointed out that the police department has just about 5% compliance. That means actually putting these requirements, having them not just policies and training, but actually having them playing out in operations.
Yeah. Chris, your overall thoughts on how they addressed crime and public safety today?
Yeah, I think at this point, pretty much all the candidates, these 2 included, really agree that 2 things have to happen on crime, which is the top issue for voters right now, which is, number 1, reducing crime and improving at least the perception of safety, and at the same time reducing police misconduct. And I think accomplishing both of those 2 things at the same time is going to be a big challenge. All the candidates have some plan for doing those things. They differ in their points of emphasis, but I think everyone's got more or less the same agenda. I agree that Jamal Green has, staked out perhaps the most clear alternative to a lot of the others, where you see a lot of agreement amongst what we might call the more mainstream candidates, and he's got hit the the phrase root causes came up from him many times today, and I think he's staked out a bit of a distinct position from the others. In that sense, I'm maybe surprised he's not polling at a bit higher numbers, offering a more distinct alternative.
Any thoughts, Mariah?
Yeah, I think his argument is, I agree with Chip that out of all of the candidates, and Chris, that out of all the candidates, I think Jamal Green's public safety plan focuses the most on root causes. Within his public safety plan, it includes creating universal pre-K. So like those are very early root causes that he's talking about trying to address, and they're all within his public safety plan, creating a Chicago bank to help to help people get home loans and those sorts of things. But he's also arguing, it struck me today that when he spoke, he said, well, talking about the immediate response to crime, even when he's talking about the immediate response to crime, he's still not talking about more policing. I mean, but he is in an indirect way. He says he wants to have a Department of Social Workers to respond to mental health crises, spend $100 million on that. And the argument there is that it would then free up police officers who are now responding to those mental health crises to instead, work on bettering the clearance rate or responding to, more violent crime that they need to be on the scene for. So that did strike me.
I'm glad you brought that up. Chip, can you give us some context of some of these specific problems that the candidates have been talking about? Let's start with the low clearance rates. But first, can I get you to just define what that is?
Yeah, it's going to sound more complicated than it is. But when we talk about the murder clearance rate, when CPD does, they're talking about two numbers, one divided by the other. So first we have the number of murders that are solved in a year, and that can be murders that were committed years ago. It doesn't matter when the murder was committed. So that's the top number, and that's divided by the numbers that are committed that year. So in the last couple of years, the police department has increased its murder clearance rate. The mayor pointed this out yesterday, that the clearance rate officially has been up over 50% now, 2 years in a row. The trouble with that is that a much smaller portion of these offenders, the cops are saying, we know who committed this crime, but a much smaller portion of them are actually facing justice because they're dead, for example, or they can't be found.
So what's the clearance rate in Chicago?
Well, the official clearance rate right now, I actually don't have the rate for this last year off the top of my head, but it's 50-some% for this last year.
The number 1,600 has been said a lot when it comes to CPD department vacancies. Where's that number coming from, Chip?
Well, that is basically when Rahm Emanuel, Mayor Lightfoot's predecessor, when he faced a gun violence surge after the Laquan McDonald killing, gun violence through the roof, he, over several years, increased the size of the police department by 1,200 officers. So that's just not hiring 1,200. That means replacing retirements as well. The department got 1,200 bigger, and that brought it up to about 13,300 sworn officers. Where we are now, though, a pandemic happened. We had all this unrest after the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police. Retirements ticked up, and they had, no surprise, they had the police department had a very hard time keeping up its recruitment pace. So now they're down to, I think it's about 11,600 officers. So that's really what we're talking about. And now the police department, Superintendent Brown, Mayor Lightfoot, they say they've now picked up the pace of hiring again, that they're hiring at the rate or faster than retirements are taking place. They say it was like 950 last year. So they want to build up the ranks again, and we'll see how long that takes if they're allowed to continue in their jobs.
So, Chris, the first question that I asked the candidates was what short-term plans they have to address public safety. We asked this to all the other candidates at the forum yesterday as well. And so let's start with activist Jamal Green on this one. He mentioned that pro-policing strategies don't work and there's a need to do new things. He acknowledged that many of his plans are long-term plans, and he said that in the short term, he would invest $77 million in block club infrastructure, and he plans on investing $30 million in youth intervention. Any thoughts on his assertion that pro-policing strategies, that they just haven't been effective?
Well, I think it depends what you want to call pro-policing and what you think the pro-policing strategies that we have tried in the past. I'm not sure. He wasn't specific about which policies he included in that category and which ones he might want to get rid of. I think what was clear, he never said, and he used the phrase defund the police or anything like that. He didn't suggest reducing their funding, but it was clear that he wanted to increase funding for other things, including social workers. And I would say if Jamal Green wins this race, it'll be a banner day in Chicago for social workers, because his answer on almost every policy issue involved hiring social workers. But that was his first answer to your question about short-term fixes to policing was, I think he said $100 million to improve, to provide more social workers to sort of complement what the police does. And I think he saw that as part of a broader strategy that, in his view, improved working conditions for police. I mean, he did say that he thought the job of policing had gotten hard, that police were overworked, their schedules were too hard, that they were effectively being asked to behave as social workers, and that he saw the hiring of actual social workers as being a complement to what police do.
I see. Mariah, part of Sawyer's safety plan mentions, quote, immediately implementing fundamental changes in CPD that have both an immediate impact on public safety and also serve the long-term improvement of the department. Now, some of those immediate measures that he was talking about was rehiring retired police, 20-year pension vesting, providing officers with mental health services, and investing in officer training. What do you make of that? He says that we need to make sure that police are effective and compliant to their rules.
Sure. You know, bringing back retired police officers can be a controversial idea. You know, Chip and I reported a story on crime where one expert told us that is something that you have to think long and hard about if you want to bring police officers from back in the day, decades ago, who you know, may not have been part of a, you know, the Chicago Police Department has been bogged down with civil rights complaints against Black and brown Chicagoans for decades. We are under a federal consent decree because of it. And so if you're bringing back retired police officers, what does training look like for those police officers to ensure they're held to the standards that this police department has now and it's aspirational standards for the future as well. It's also a matter of convincing those officers whether, I mean, if they want to come back. And so I don't think it's just an easy, you know, let's bring back retired police officers, though that is a popular idea among multiple candidates, including Alderwoman Sophia King, too, who envisions a reserve of 1,000 retired police officers.
Chris?
Yeah, and I think this just speaks to the tension between these two goals that I mentioned before that I think all the candidates support, which is reducing crime, making police more effective, while at the same time reducing police misconduct and changing the culture of the institution. And so I think when you talk about bringing back retired police, is that consistent with changing the culture of the institution, or is that reinforcing the culture of the institution? And I think we'll see these kinds of trade-offs or tensions in goals throughout a lot of the ideas that are going to come up about policing.
Yeah. Chip, we asked the candidates about changing the culture at CPD. They had interesting responses there. Green said that we need to take, quote, the burden off of police officers' shoulders, end quote. And he's referring to the possibility of them doing something that ends up on a viral video, for instance. And Alderman Sawyer said that the officers are afraid of their superiors. What do you make of that?
Well, activist Jamal Green, I think that he is alluding to shifting a lot of the 911 calls that come in have to do with mental health crises, and shifting those calls away from having, you know, sending patrol units to respond, which, you know, can end up in with, you know, forced hospitalizations, a lot of people in handcuffs, violence, and it can get worse from there. So he's a big proponent of that, and I have to say that Mayor Lightfoot has launched a program they call it CARE, and they've got 4 mobile units. They're out in vans. Every business day, only 1 shift a week in 4 parts of the city, but they have expansion plans for this year. So she deserves some credit for getting that program rolling, and they are committed to expanding it, expanding the number of calls, the types of calls, rather, that these units can handle. You know, even some where the public safety risk is not so clear, they're going to be starting to handle some of those calls beginning in March, and not just referring them to police, and also increasing the number of units, and eventually adding on a second shift. Alderman Sawyer, refresh me, what did he say?
Alderman Sawyer, as far as the culture, he said that officers are afraid of their superiors.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. I wasn't sure what he meant about that.
It seems to me to fall in line with the criticism of David Brown and, you know, that superintendent not being from Chicago, not being able to motivate Chicago police officers who, a lot of candidates claim have lost trust in leadership. That's kind of where that criticism to me falls in line with.
Yeah,
Before
he also talked about what he called a toxic work environment for police, and the fear he suggested that if they didn't turn their body camera on at exactly the right moment, they could somehow be sanctioned. So I think he was referring to a fear amongst cops that even if they're doing the right thing, they could end up
They'll get in trouble.
Getting in trouble.
All right, before we take a pause, Mariah, Jamal Green has put, as we've mentioned, a lot of emphasis on investing in people. Today, he talked about having alternatives for young folks, right? This like having trade schools, having tech hubs, having more pipelines to different careers right out of school. What do you think of his community-focused approach? I mean, don't some of these things already exist?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think a lot of candidates are talking about more job training. Sophia King says we can promote college and we can promote, careers in the trades. I do think that one interesting thing is that's a message that could really resonate and might be really resonating with voters. Our survey, another piece of our poll is out today that shows, one, as we all know, residents are most concerned about crime. Voters say that 44% of respondents said that they will vote on that issue. That will determine who they vote for mayor. But one interesting piece of the poll was that people listed job training for residents as the most effective way to reduce crime in the city of Chicago, even more than hiring more police officers. And so I do think that he's onto something there, and I think that it's something that, even when I talk to residents, people anecdotally about crime, it's a lot of people are sick of hearing, oh, we're going to add more police, we're going to add more police. Chicago has some of the most police out of any, big city in the country, according to FBI data that Chip and I pulled for our story. And so I think people do want to hear more about opportunities for youth and how to provide them an alternative to violence as well.
We'll take a pause. That is WBEZ's city government reporter, Mariah Woelfel. We've got WBEZ's criminal justice reporter, Chip Mitchell, and professor at the Harris School of Public Policy, Chris Berry. We're analyzing what we heard over the past couple of days after 7 of the candidates for Chicago mayor joined us for our forums. We're going to take a quick pause and dig more into the ideas that candidates have for transportation and education. But first, let's get an update on recovery efforts in Turkey. Here's Lisa. All righty. How you doing? This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We are back live from the U of C campus with post-mayoral forum analysis. Earlier, we spent time with mayoral candidates Alderman Rod Sawyer and activist Jamal Green, talking through key issues on voters' minds. With us now is Mariah Woelfel, who's WBEZ's city government reporter, and Chip Mitchell, a WBEZ criminal justice reporter. Also, Chris Berry, who's a professor at the Harris School of Public Policy and the academic director of the Center for Municipal Finance. Okay, gang, let's go around the room here. I want to start with crime on public transportation and hear from all of you, because this was a big concern, as we know, for Chicagoans. It appeared a lot on our People's Agenda survey. But what do we think about the different approaches that the candidates have had over the past couple of days to ensure commuters' safety? I'll start with you, Chris.
Yeah, I think at least starting with the two that we heard from today, there were not, first of all, the plans were not, I thought, nearly as detailed as what we heard from them on other areas. I thought their transportation plans were a little rougher. They both agreed on, they used different terms. I think Alderman Sawyer talked about ambassadors and Jamal Green talked about peacekeepers, but they both had the sort of idea of a non-police set of people to patrol the CTA trains and buses. So that was, I think, the most tangible idea they each had. And amongst other candidates, some go more towards actual policing, and there's a variety of ideas about improving just the system and like various technical aspects of it. But I thought this was an area in which they were just not as well developed in their proposals.
Mariah?
Yeah, I think when you look at their transit proposals, it mirrors kind of how they talked about crime as well, with Jamal really focusing on this social workforce. He called the CTA a homeless shelter that needs social workers. I liked Chris's comment that if he's elected mayor, it's going to be heyday for social workers in Chicago. And you know, really, he didn't mention police or private security on the CTA, as far as I heard. Jamal talked about peacekeepers. Sawyer did talk about bringing in, you know, some of the police officers that are at O'Hare or the different airports in the area and bringing them to boost patrols on the CTA. This is something we've heard Paul Vallis talk about as well, who wants to get rid of private security on the CTA, which the city, you know, pays for now to kind of more so deter crime, and you know, as kind of just a deterrent visual on the CTA. And so that was interesting, and yeah, I think that's something we've heard multiple candidates talk about, switching to police officers on trains.
Yeah, Chip, your thoughts on these different approaches?
Well, you know, as Chris and Mariah are saying, it was interesting that they both took the opportunity to take a shot at businessman Willie Wilson, who said he would boot people who are sleeping on trains. Sawyer said that, you know, pointed out that they're sleeping there out of necessity, and that we have to do better for these people, provide them shelter. And Green took a crack at Wilson's line. You know, he's not surprised. His words were, you know, we're not surprised to hear this out of Willie Wilson, because when he's out there hunting rabbits, referring to what Wilson has said his approach would be, going after shooters.
Right. Well, Green focused on case management and providing services to people riding the train instead of more police on trains. He wants to create an armed and unarmed transit peacekeepers protection agency. So what is your sense of the feasibility of those plans, Chris?
Well, my guess is they're pretty feasible in terms of getting the bodies on the trains, and they're probably within, if we're reallocating a budget from a private security force to what we'll just call peacekeepers or ambassadors, that seems to me quite feasible. Now, what its effect will be, assuming we're talking about people who cannot make arrests, I'm not sure what their powers would be, exactly what they're supposed to do. Again, in Jamal Green's vision, it sounded more like they would be social workers. Maybe that'd be very effective. Maybe it'd be less effective. But I think the feasibility of getting the bodies in place seems pretty good. Yeah.
Chip, I asked you this yesterday, and the answer was no. Were there any evidence-based solutions that you heard candidates talking about today?
No, I didn't hear any evidence-based solutions today. I don't know that we heard any from the 5 candidates yesterday. I'm not sure, actually, I may not be the expert on this, but I'm not sure that there are really good evidence-based solutions to crime on transit and the best ways to deal with it. You know, one thing that would make a difference, and Mayor Lightfoot has pointed this out, is just economic revival, and these trains and buses being full of passengers would go a long way to discouraging crime. More eyes and ears, and people just, you know, voicing displeasure, people not feeling like they're alone with somebody whose behavior is antisocial. I'd like to see a study, though, you know, comparing. I mean, one thing I would like to see, I saw a study in New York City comparing the safety in a recent study during the pandemic, comparing the safety of riding a New York City subway, where there are a lot of complaints about safety right now, just like in Chicago, comparing the safety of riding a train to driving a car to work. And you know, the finding, of course, was that it's a lot safer to ride a train than to be driving to work and risking a violent, New York City, risking a violent collision on the road. So,
you have thoughts, Mariah?
I will just say that, I've heard candidates call the CT, I think it was Cam Buckner perhaps, who talks a lot about transit because he rides the train himself, he doesn't drive a car.
Talks a lot about ghost buses.
Yes, he does. He loves that phrase. I think I've heard people call it a microcosm of the city. You go on there, there's mental health crisis, there's homelessness, there's crime, all in the same ways that, people are dealing with all throughout the city of Chicago. And in terms of evidence, I do think the city has said there's evidence to suggest that, pairing mental health providers with police officers to respond to crime not on transit in different areas of the city, which the city is doing right now, is an effective tool to deal with mental health crises that are called into 911. And so I do wonder if Jamal Green or even Sawyer's idea of ambassadors or social workers on transit falls in line with that idea that instead of having police officers respond to these crises you're seeing on the CTA, if a mental health provider would be better equipped to do that. It is interesting on the plausibility of that plan. I don't know where those employees would fall under. It kind of sounds like with Jamal Green's plans, like you're going to need an entire social workforce. Is that in the public health department? Is that within the police department? Where does that budget come from? And his idea is to declare a state of emergency for funds. So that I don't know how exactly that would work.
Well, Chris, we asked the candidates about their plans to increase more environmentally conscious transit options. They both said that they would support making biking and walking safer. Green said that he would do an audit of CTA to see where more buses are needed, and that eventually public transit should also be free. Anything else stick out to you? I know earlier you mentioned that both of their transit plans were kind of rough today.
I thought this was an area where they were punting a little bit. So Jamal Green wanted to do a study or an audit, I think he called it, of the existing routes and where were they and who was underserved. That seemed reasonable. And at the same time, Alderman Sawyer seemed to be making some technical points about a software that was used to route buses and that wasn't being used as effectively as it might. But I thought for both of them, they were punting a little bit on some details about what they would do and how or why it would work.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
They also both said that they will reopen the Department of Environment, and that is a campaign issue that every single candidate except for Lightfoot says that they would do. Take it for what you will, Lightfoot also said she would do that on the campaign trail and, hasn't in her first 4 years and, says she might be open to it pending a feasibility study that her office commissioned. And so that Department of Environment, I think, would help make some of those decisions about environmentally friendly transit.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, we're broadcasting a post-mayoral forum analysis from the campus of UChicago. Today is the last day of our two-part mayoral forum. We spoke with activist Jamal Green and Alderman Roderick Sawyer. And with us now to break down that last hour is Chris Berry with the Harris School of Public Policy and Center for Municipal Finance, and WBEZ reporters Mariah Wolfel and Chip Mitchell. So education. Earlier, we talked about how much the two candidates agreed on in their approach to crime, but there were a couple things that Jamal Green and Rod Sawyer disagreed on when it came to education. So for instance, CPS building investments, closing schools, as we mentioned earlier, having cops in schools. What do you make of all that, Chris? Those differences?
I think that was the one area in which we actually heard a little bit of back and forth between them, some objections from one to the other, and they did disagree exactly as you said on school closings, on having police in schools. It seemed like the alderman had already taken some actions on these and was more or less kind of defending his past actions. Jamal Green was more taking a vision towards the future. I think in both cases it'll be interesting to see in education more generally what exactly is the mayor's role going to be. CPS is a separate jurisdiction. We're moving to an independently elected school board shortly. What is the mayor really going to be able to do on education anyway? But they did have some differences in vision.
We asked the candidates how they would rework the CPS budget to put more money into classrooms. Anything surprise you with the responses there, Mariah?
I don't think Sawyer really addressed budget issues. I have heard him, I have heard his plans on budget issues. The main question here is whether what CPS is going to do with a projected $600 million budget shortfall that it could face in the next few years as debt and pensions continue to weigh down the district. This next mayor, education is going to be a huge issue for this next mayor because, as Chris noted, we are moving to an elected school board. Does that mean CPS should be financially independent from the rest of the city, or will CPS continue to have to take on some of the costs that the city has shifted under Mayor Lightfoot, which has, exacerbated the potential budget crisis? We have the school closings moratorium lifting. Sawyer has been the most emphatic about closing schools, the need to close under-enrolled schools, and that is a complicated issue. And Jamal Green is vehemently against closing those schools. But in terms of budget, I think Jamal Green's answer about funding is more clear here, in which he said that the district needs to move to a needs-based enrollment formula. Currently, schools are funded based on how many kids they have. It's an enrollment-based formula. And Jamal Green has said that he would like to shift that to sending money to schools based on what they need to be successful.
Chip, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on two quick things for us. This budget question, first of all, what you heard today from the candidates, and also what do you make of their responses on how they improve safety in the schools?
Well, I did hear Alderman Sawyer take credit for a decision by the city. There was an effort basically to withdraw police officers from all city schools, and Sawyer and the mayor and others basically put the brakes on that, and it was left basically up to local school councils. And he pointed out that he served for 10 years on a local school council, and if I'm not mistaken, Jamal Green wants officers out of the schools entirely. So that to me was a clear difference. One thing about their funding of all of their public safety plans, I didn't actually hear from either of them or from any other candidates on how, there are a lot of ideas about mental health services and wraparound services and job training and mentoring, everything about, but where's the money going to come from? We did a little study ourselves a few years ago just on community violence intervention targeted at the 30,000 young people, young adults that were most vulnerable to gun violence, and we came up with a figure of $1 billion a year. And I don't, a lot of money. And I don't think that was an exaggeration. And I don't hear the candidates being frank with the sort of investment to actually address root causes of violence, what it will cost, and where the money is going to come from.
We'll have to leave it there. That's WBEZ's criminal justice reporter, Chip Mitchell. We're also joined by WBEZ city government reporter, Mariah Woelfel, and professor at the Harris School of Public Policy, Chris Berry. Thank you all. Coming up, we are still live from Hyde Park. We're going to take a deep dive into the neighborhood's political history through the lens of architecture. A very special edition of our series, What's That Building with Dennis Rodkin, is just ahead on Reset from 91.5 WBEZ. But first, over to Lisa Labez with the latest news update.